Okay, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to talk about the Persian Gulf. For those of you that aren't familiar with that part of the world, you've got the Gulf. It's interchangeably called the Persian Gulf, which is the oldest name, and more recent use of the term Arabian Gulf. Depends obviously which side you're from, which you refer to it as. Iran on one side, and then the Arab states, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE, and a tiny bit of Oman on the Arab side. So, if you're a sawfish, the Gulf would really be, on paper, an ideal habitat. So, it's very shallow. It's kind of post-Holocene in origin, so the average depth is only 35 metres. It's warm, it's subtropical, it's high benthic and fisheries productivity. And we've also, from studies elsewhere, we know that seagrass, sawfish are associated with certain habitats. So we have extensive seagrass beds in the south of the Gulf, and we've got the Tigris, Euphrates estuary system in the northwest, and lots of salt and sand and mud flats as well. And there's more limited mangroves in Iran and a little bit in the UAE as well, but not extensive mangroves. So good environment on paper, but what about researching them? Data poor environment for all elasmobanks in general. So up until the past 5 years, when we started to document diversity, really very little on anything to do with elasmobank. It's not recorded in government surveys. If they are recorded, they're just lumped together with sharks and rays. A source that I use quite often is actually a survey that was done in 1937, 1938. That's actually one of the most useful pieces of information. So just a huge data gap in terms of scientific data. So it just makes the job of assessing sawfish in particular very difficult. So we're forced to kind of scratch around for these scattered records, and this just takes a huge amount of time. I'm based in the UK. I'm doing this remotely. I'm not fluent in Arabic or Farsi, so it takes a huge amount of time to gain a single record. And I've been doing this, trying to collect data on individual animals, and we've been doing this for around 10 years and have less than 100 records. So that indicates the level of information there is. So you're going, trying to get individual records of saws from people's homes, very occasionally from museums. The state of museums is very poor. The state of preservation, as you see from that animal from Qatar, very badly preserved, inaccessible museums. You often have to rely on material in shops, things like this that you'll occasionally see. So we don't have scientific data. The actual individual records of animals are few and far between. So we're kind of pushed by necessity really to pull together data from a lot of disparate sources to try and pull together a coherent picture. So we've had to look at archaeology from historical sources, from anecdotal sources as well. So just in summary, just to start off, we definitely got good records of Zeestron and Cuspidata from the Gulf. They're definitely there, or they were at least there. And the Gulf is right on the edge of the range of Microdon, or Pristis now, sorry, just outside the Gulf, and I think there's records of Clavata right up to Pakistan, so a possibility of 2 further species as well. So if we look at the historical status, the vertebrae of sawfish are very distinctive and very easily identifiable from remains of their conjectins. So there's been some really good zooarchaeological work along the southern coast of the Gulf, and that's documented that these sawfish vertebrae are found all along the Gulf Coast from start of civilization, really, 5000 BC, right up until sort of 1700 AD. So that doesn't indicate that this was a rare species. So being used, and in some cases, at some sites, they're actually common remains, so possibly even targeted. And then, again, looking at alternative sources of information, this is from about 13th, 14th century geographer And he describes and provides an accurate illustration of sawfish occurring up in the estuary around the Iran, northwestern Gulf area, and then being described as numerous, and young animals being described, small animals. And then in the 1800s as well, when Western explorers and naturalists and colonial administrators were going there, they were noticing large animals, abundant animals, and recording a number of colloquial names as well for them, the sawfish locally. And pearl diving, one of the first real industries in the Gulf, had thousands of divers in the water grubbing around on the seabed for months and months at a time, and shark bites did occur, but the divers were documented as not being particularly afraid of shark bite, but they were afraid of injury from sawfish, and there were reportedly documented records of people being cut in half by them. So starting to look a bit near the present day, documented record from the US Hydrographic Office when it was doing a pilot of the Gulf, and they documented an island off the UAE that had entertained or supported a targeted fishery for sawfish for a couple of months. And again, looking at alternative sources, there was a British diplomat, the commissioner for Bahrain when it was a British colony, and this was around the 1930s, 1940s, and he actually accurately described sawfish sores and made that observation that beaches were literally covered with sawfish bills. And he even went as far as to illustrate the frontispiece of the book with an accurate picture of the sawfish. And then prior to the 1960s, about the 50s, sawfish described as being, or large sawfish described as being a hazard to fishermen in Dubai Creek. So getting closer to today, there's very little data that we can actually say that there's been an actual decline, but we know that there's been some trawl surveys, old ones and new ones that were broadly comparable. So in UAE waters, that's both the Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, in the late 60s and in the 2000s. One of them, the 1960s one, had two species as common, described them as common, and then nothing recorded in the more recent one. And guidebooks for oil workers in Saudi who actually commented on these are now far less common than they used to be in a 30-year gap. And again, with the lack of scientific data, we have to infer rarity or infer absence. It's a very large, distinctive animal. It's usually going to get recorded when it is caught. So we've got a large number of surveys. I've just had an email now that for surveys 2009 to 2011 throughout the Gulf by all the Gulf states on the Arab side, 250 hours of trawling, and they didn't catch a single sawfish. So absent from fish books and guides. Aerial surveys for dugongs. The southern Gulf's really important for dugongs. So the past 6-7 years they've done intensive surveys. They regularly record sharks and stingrays. They've never recorded a sawfish. And then market surveys I've been doing in the Gulf for the past 5 years. Processed several thousand elasmobranchs and never seen a sawfish. And when they do occur, single animals in the past 20-30 years, they're noteworthy, so that indicates a rare animal. So looking at the status of them now, I think we'd be fairly convinced, there's fairly strong evidence that there's been a severe decline in them from a couple of hundred years ago or even sort of before 1950. But in terms of local extinction, this is much more difficult. There's occasional reports. We know there's records from 2006, 2007, occasional animals, just a complete lack of data on elasmobranchs, generally really bad data situation. The situation on the entire Iranian coast is very unclear. We have landings figures from one province of Iran up to, I think, over 120 tonnes for a year. So we don't know whether that's misidentification or bad reporting, just don't know at the moment. And then, it's unclear, this photo is from just outside the Gulf, in the Gulf of Oman, so still occasional captures of of 5 animals is exceptional. But those are just outside the Gulf. We know they're highly mobile. Are these going into the Gulf? We just don't know. Just quickly run through threats. We're all going to talk about fisheries a lot. The Gulf's shallow. It's intensively developed coastline. This is a major problem. Probably beyond the scope of this workshop, but just coastal development everywhere. Huge loss of intertidal all around the Gulf. That's a really big problem. And quickly run through the other threats that your average sawfish might expect. Gill nets just everywhere. Very intensive fisheries, catching the entire sort of range of elasmobranchs. Any small animals in the intertidal are going to get nailed by hadra, intertidal fish traps. There's prawn trawling, there's fish trawling, and there's long lining for sharks, which also catches batoids as well. Anything that escapes through that is going to get taken by recreational fisheries. I was talking to a young man about a month ago in Bahrain who'd caught and actually eaten a small sawfish. So there has been some progress. The Shark Conservation Society, UK-based charity, they've lobbied local governments, so they've secured protection in Qatar and Bahrain recently, hopefully Kuwait in the near future, and then possibly thinking about broader coverage later on. And that's resulted in having to get posters done in multiple languages. A lot of the fishers in the Gulf aren't necessarily from Arab states or around. There's a lot of expatriate fishers there. So in terms of conservation priorities, I think the main one, and I think for globally, is just getting sawfish on the radar. They're iconic species, they're very distinctive, but if I went out in the streets and asked someone what is a sawfish, I think a lot of people wouldn't know. That's a given, really. I think just simple desk-based research, interview-based research, funded MSc projects would be really important in our own language. So, of one MSc by an Iranian student, for example, would just plug that data gap. And that's it. Thank you.